talking about sex hormones, I want to make it clear that this is something that applies to men and women. We tend to think of sex hormones as something that only affects women, but it also affects men as well. So this is a topic that is relevant to everyone. And also during this broadcast, I'm going to be talking a fair bit about female hormones, but also menopause as well. But in terms of the recommendations that I'm giving, it's not only about menopause. These are things that should help with anyone at any stage of their life. And because I'm making recommendations that are, to help the majority, this is only sort of really scraping the surface. There's a lot more that can be done to balance hormones. So I can see that I've got a few people watching already, which is great. Hi Rebecca, thanks for saying hi. And hi Jen and Zahar, sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. Nice to see you all here. So as I was just saying, this is something that applies to men and women. And the reason why I'm doing this webinar is because I so often get people come into my clinic who tell me that they are exercising every day and they are eating really well and they just cannot lose weight. They're really trying, huge calorie deficit, and they're just not losing weight. And very often it tends to be women who are of menopausal age. So menopausal could be anything from 40. That's when your hormone levels can start to drop, or it could be even earlier for some women. And it can be all the way up to sort of mid-50s, late 50s. Very often it's women who are in that age category that come in and are struggling with their weight, but also men go through that process as well. So there is actually a male menopause, which is known as andropause, and that is a similar process where the hormone levels start to drop. And for both men and women, you can really start to struggle with your weight at that point. Or even if you struggled with your weight your whole life, often at that point that can be when you find that actually things that you're trying aren't making any difference at all now, whereas previously you might have made a dent in sort of the weight loss. So that's sort of why I'm talking about the subject, is because it's just such a common theme in my clinic, is having people come in that just can't lose weight, and very often it does seem to be to do with their hormones. So if you've been following the group that is on Facebook, then you'll know that there's lots of factors to consider for weight loss. And I've previously spoken about thyroid. In the future I'm going to be doing a session about gut health, because that is really important as well. And we've spoken about stress as well. So usually it's all of these things coming together and causing imbalances on one another. So your stress affects your sex hormones and the other way around. So it's never just a case of just one thing causing you a problem. Usually it's several things coming together. So whilst we're talking about sex hormones in this session, I want you to remember that actually it's probably several things coming together to cause an issue. So I want to start off by talking about the types of imbalances that can occur. So I'm not going to go into great detail on this because it's not necessarily essential information, but basically one of the most common types of imbalances I see is where you have too much estrogen or estrogen dominance, and that can be caused by too much estrogen or not enough progesterone. And when you have that balance of high estrogen to low progesterone, you are more prone to insulin resistance, which basically means that you go into fat storage mode. So having too much estrogen or not having enough testosterone can put your body into fat storage mode, and obviously that's going to make it much more difficult to lose weight. That's a problem that can affect both men and women, by the way. Testosterone is a problem that we tend to associate with men, or a hormone that we tend to associate with men, and in men it tends to drop with age, but also it drops with age for women as well. So for both men and women, a drop in testosterone can again cause an increase in body fat. But also a problem that's more common in younger women is high testosterone, which can cause insulin resistance and therefore weight gain. So the hormones estrogen, progesterone and testosterone, there's a very delicate balance, and if they become imbalanced, then almost always it kind of sets you up for laying down extra fat stores. So something that occurs for a lot of people is as you get older, as women get older, and they head towards menopause, basically the ovaries shut down, and that means that your stress glands, the adrenal glands, have to take over the production of your sex hormones. So if you're stressed, then you're not going to be producing your sex hormones very efficiently, because your adrenal glands is trying to produce your sex hormones and your stress hormones, and they're always going to prioritize stress hormones. So if you're stressed, then whatever age you are, that's going to affect your sex hormones. But if you are menopausal or perimenopausal, then stress is going to have a huge impact on you. So stress is something that we're going to talk about a bit more. So next I want to talk about how these imbalances occur. So firstly, problem can occur if you're not producing your hormones in a balanced way. So that links in with what I was just saying about stress. So stress can down-regulate your production of sex hormones, but something else that can affect your production of sex hormones is deficiencies. So, if you don't have enough magnesium, vitamin B6, zinc, omega-3, protein, these things all are needed to make your sex hormones. Also, dietary fat as well. Obviously, omega-3 is a dietary fat, but other types of dietary fat as well. So, deficiency in any of those areas will impact your production of sex hormones. So, if you don't have enough raw materials to make the hormones, then they're not going to be produced in a balanced way. And finally, your sex hormones can become imbalanced if you are not breaking down those hormones efficiently and getting rid of them from the body efficiently. So we're constantly making sex hormones and constantly removing them and eliminating them from the body as well. And for women, there's a cycle, and over the course of the month you produce your sex hormones and they're removed sort of as you go along. But what can happen is you might not be eliminating those hormones efficiently. So your liver might be sluggish at removing those hormones. So that can be for various reasons. It can be a genetic factor, but it can also, usually, it would be a lifestyle factor. So it might be something you're taking in through the diet or through your environment that's actually slowing down your liver and making the elimination of estrogens less efficient. So that can happen, but also once those hormones have been processed by the liver, they need to be eliminated from the body. So they travel through into the digestive tract via your bile, and then they're eliminated when you go to the toilet. But if you are constipated, then you can actually end up reabsorbing those hormones into your body. So that's a problem, because you produce your hormones and then you use them and then you get rid of them. So if you're getting rid of them but reabsorbing them, then not only are you going to have this month's hormones floating around your body, but you're going to have last month's hormones circulating around as well. So that's when things like estrogen dominance can occur, or too much testosterone, and that's when your body starts laying down more fat stores as well. So that's a very brief overview of the types of imbalances that can occur and how they occur. And I could go into more detail, but as I've said, that's not the essential information at this point. Obviously, what you want to know is what can you do about it. So let's start talking about what you can do, what changes you can make to generally support your hormone balance. So as I said, stress is the most important thing. Managing your stress is the best thing that you can do for balancing your hormone levels, if you're stressed, that is. And most people are. Pretty much everyone I speak to, they've got so much on their plate. From looking after, poorly relatives, bringing up children, working full time, juggling everything. We're constantly have pressure on us, and we're constantly stimulated, and that causes your stress hormones to be higher than they should be. And as I said, so if you're stressed, then your sex hormone production will be down-regulated. So that's one way in which stress impacts your weight management, but also stress impacts your thyroid, it impacts your sleep quality, it impacts your gut bacteria, and all of those things are linked in with weight management as well. So whilst this isn't a session about stress, if you are stressed, then that's one of the most important things that you can do for your sex hormone balance and your weight management, is just start to be mindful of what you're doing to alleviate stress and the types of things that you're taking on each and every day. So manage stress. If you take nothing else away from this, then just manage stress away from this. As I said, so deficiency of omega-3 can be a problem, and that is something that is so common because barely any people eat enough fish. And even if you're taking omega-3 supplements, yes, they're helpful, but they're not always absorbed very well. So deficiency in omega-3 can be an issue. So good quality omega-3 supplements and eating oily fish is really helpful for balancing your sex hormones. And also, I'm going to talk about this in a future broadcast when I talk about gut health more, but there was some really interesting research that was done on eating fish and weight management, and it was looking at about how eating fish affects your gut bacteria. And basically what they found is that those who ate more fish had a much better sort of gut bacterial profile, and going on a diet that included eating more fish led to more weight loss. So fish is really, really good for not only your weight loss, but also your gut health as well, as long as you're not allergic to fish, obviously. So that's omega-3. Omega-6. So omega-6 is another type of fat, and it gets demonized as a bad fat. It's not a bad fat, but we just have way too much of it in the typical diet. So omega-6 is found in grains and vegetable oils and poor quality meat. So your sort of bog standard meat that you would get from the supermarket is fed on not a natural diet for them. So it's fed on grains, and grains are high in omega-6. So the typical Western diet is very high in omega-6 and very low in omega-3, and that balance is very inflammatory, and that inflammation has been linked to sort of upregulation of fat storage. So reducing your omega-6 intake by swapping vegetable oils for olive oil and coconut oil, cutting down on your intake of grains, buying better quality meat, that makes a real significant difference to the amount of inflammation in your body and therefore your ability to lose weight. Protein. So protein is needed to make your hormones, because protein breaks down into amino acids and they go into the production of your hormones. And so when I look at my clients' food diaries, I very rarely see someone who isn't eating enough protein, particularly when they first come to me anyway. So try and get some sort of protein into every meal, and that doesn't have to be meat. It might be eggs, it might be beans, lentils. There's lots of vegetarian protein. It doesn't necessarily have to be meat. But if it's good quality meat, then that's fine too. Cruciferous vegetables. So these are things like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts. If you remember that picture I posted on the group recently of those little carelette things, they are cruciferous vegetables as well. That family of vegetables, they contain something called DIM, and that supports your liver in removing estrogens. So having a portion of cruciferous vegetables every day, ideally, is really helpful for supporting your elimination of sex hormones. So there's quite a few things that I could talk about here, but I'm just going to talk about the real key ones. So dairy is one to really consider. So in some people, dairy can trigger a release of histamine, and histamine stimulates the ovaries to release estrogen. So if you're having a lot of dairy, in some people that can cause estrogen dominance, which causes you to lay down more fat. So it's not something that is relevant to everyone, but it's quite common. It's not a case of removing all dairy, but reducing your dairy down significantly, and where possible, opting for alternatives like coconut milk and almond milk and that sort of thing. And you can use those things in baking as well, using butter alternatives. Cutting down your intake of dairy can make quite a significant difference if that is a problem for you. Unfortunately, there isn't actually a good test to detect that problem, but basically if you remove dairy from your diet for a few months, then that's, usually you will see quite a significant change in yourself if that is a problem for you. But you might not have any obvious symptoms of intolerance if you do have a problem with dairy. So the final sort of main recommendation is to have regular bowel movements. So try to avoid constipation, and this goes back to what I was saying about your liver eliminating your hormones into your digestive tract. So if you're constipated, then you're going to be reabsorbing hormones, and again you're going to be at risk of having estrogen dominance, where you're going to be laying down more fat stores. So having regular bowel movements is important. So if you're chronically constipated and it's a problem that isn't resolved with having more fibre, more water and being more active, then it could be more of a bacterial imbalance that you've got. And there are tests that you can do to try to identify and address those issues. So that's sort of my key recommendations. So just to summarise those, manage stress, that is the absolute key one. Make sure you're having plenty of omega-3 and cut down on omega-6. Make sure you've got protein in every meal. One thing I mentioned earlier was about zinc, B6 and magnesium, all really important for supporting your hormone balance. Cruciferous vegetables, so that's your kale and cauliflower, broccoli, those sorts of things. And making sure that you have regular bowel movements to prevent that reabsorption of hormones into circulation. I can see a few people have just joined, so you're joining fairly late on, but don't worry because you can rewatch this later on. So I just want to finish off by answering some of the questions that I had in the group yesterday about sex hormone balance, and both of them are related to testing. So they're quite so they're linking to each other quite well. So first of all, Janet asked a question about testing and what the best type of testing to do was to look at sex hormone balance and also thyroid balance as well. And to answer that question properly, I need to know sort of your full situation. But in terms of what I can recommend without knowing someone's full situation, thanks Rebecca, because she just said that it's really useful. So thank you for commenting. So in terms of my favourite test. So there is a test that I really like to use for people who have sex hormone imbalances, and this is a test that not only looks at your hormones but also looks at how you break down your hormones as well. So a lot of what I've been talking about here is not only about hormone balance but also how you get rid of your hormones out of the body, and this particular test looks at your top level hormones, which are your estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, but also looks at the metabolites and how you break those down and eliminate them. So that's a really helpful test because it can identify those underlying imbalances. You can also add on to that test a stress hormone profile, which is again looks at your stress hormones, so your cortisol and your DHEA, but also looks at the metabolites and how you break down those stress hormones. Again, really useful. So that's a really fab test that can help you to identify what's actually going on, why have you got hormonal imbalances. You can also do genetic testing, which looks at your hormones and how you're sort of genetically coded to remove hormones, and that's really helpful as well. In an ideal world, alongside the other tests that I've just mentioned, but that can also be helpful to really dig down into the why have you got hormone imbalance. So the test that I mentioned before is perhaps more of a what is the imbalance, and then the genetic testing can tell you more about why have you got an imbalance. And then Janet also mentioned about thyroid as well, and when it comes to thyroid, I always recommend a full thyroid panel. So I've done a video previously about thyroid, so I won't go into a huge amount of detail here. You can find it lower down in the group or in the videos section. But basically, when you go to the doctors to have your thyroid tested, they will test TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, and that will tell you about the message that goes from your brain to your thyroid, and that's all it tells you. So the testing that you have done at the doctors for your thyroid is really, it's useless, to be honest. But sometimes if you're lucky, they will test T4 as well, which is the main thyroid hormone. But I've tested a lot of people with a full thyroid panel where their TSH and their T4 is normal, but all the other hormones are out of balance. So, it's not helpful unless you're having a full thyroid panel. So that's what I recommend when it comes to thyroid testing. Rebecca also asked a question, and she said that she'd had some testing done at the doctors, and that was for sex hormones and thyroid hormones, and that they'd come back normal. But she feels that there is a problem underlying. So that linked in with what I was just saying, really, which is about how, at the doctors, your thyroid test could be completely normal, but you might have an underlying imbalance, because some of the hormones that they don't test are imbalanced. And that also is the same for the sex hormone side of things as well. So, at the doctors, what they do is they will do a blood test for your sex hormones, and they will look at maybe 3 hormones if you're lucky. And testing sex hormones through blood isn't the best way to fully understand your sex hormone balance. The test that I prefer to use is a urine test, And as I was just saying, I prefer to use that type of test because it looks at not only your hormones but how you break those hormones down as well. So you know, the testing that you have done at the doctors for sex hormones will tell you about your hormone levels, but it won't tell you about what you do with those hormones and how you break them down. So the testing that you get done there is again very top level, and it's not looking down into how you actually process those hormones and you know where the imbalance actually lies. So I would definitely recommend investigating further, even if the testing that you've had done at your doctor's indicates that everything's normal. And that's, you know, particularly if you're struggling with your weight, but also if you're showing other symptoms of sex hormone imbalance as well. So that's everything really, that covers everything that I wanted to go through. So I can see that a few people have joined fairly late on, so this is going to be available to re-watch almost immediately. So you know, please do re-watch, because we've gone through a lot of information and talked about various things that you can do to balance your sex hormones, but also why sex hormone imbalances occur. So I hope you found this useful. If you've got any questions after watching this video, then please just pop them in the comments or pop them in the group as well. So thanks for watching, and I'm sure I'll be back soon. Bye!